Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran Emporia, Kansas-based jazz drummer Jack Mouse. He began playing at an early age, at 4, and by his late teens he was already performing with musical greats like Tex Beneke, Ralph Flanagan, Ray McKinley, Les Elgart, and the great Red Norvo, along with others. Over his storied career, he's intersected with many legends. He has great stories, many albums, revelations, wisdom, and more. Enjoy the world of Jack.
Hi, Jack. How are you?
I'm awake.
There you go. I like it. It's great to meet you, man. Thanks for taking a minute out.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before we get into your life as a musician and everything that goes into who you are, I want to know how you survived the last 3 years with COVID. How did you get through that time period, which was quite tumultuous, and how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Actually, Janice and I, my wife is Janice Borla, the jazz vocalist, and we actually got through the pandemic pretty well. We were at that time living in Naperville, Illinois, which is a Chicago suburb, and we actually had a recording studio in the basement there, and so we got a lot done. Naturally, we couldn't go out and tour, we couldn't go out and play, but we got a lot of practicing done. We finished I've got a new method book coming out. We finished that. And we lined up another recording session for when the pandemic was over. We actually got through the pandemic pretty much unscathed. It was a big house. It was a 5-bedroom house. And so we didn't ever feel like we had cabin fever. So yeah, we got through it, I think, better than a lot of folks.
So let's go back a little bit in your life and tell me how this jazz journey began for you. Talk to me a little bit about where you were born and raised and how these seeds were planted in you.
Well, I was born and raised in Emporia, Kansas. Which, as of September 1st, Janice and I have moved back here. But I was born and raised in Emporia, Kansas, and my teacher, I started playing when I was 4, and my teacher was the great drummer Roy Burns, who just passed on a few years ago. He retired from playing. He was the founder of the finger control method of playing. He was one of the very first drum clinicians, and he ended up founding the Aquarian Drumhead Company. And so Roy kind of looked after me from the time I was 4 years old until he passed. But I studied with him. He was 11 years older than I was. And studied with him, and went to the College of Emporia, which was, at that time, it was a private school, and it had an incredible music department. In fact, it hosted the first collegiate jazz festival in Kansas. And they would bring guest artists in, and they brought Buddy Morrow in one year. And Buddy ended up hiring me before I got out of college. And they brought Doc Severinsen in. It's where I met Clark Terry, who I ended up working for a long time. And I stayed there until 1969. The Vietnam was in progress at that time, and I needed to get into the service, so I ended up going to auditioning at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and spent 4 years as a drum set soloist with the Falconeers there, and it was a great band. The military bands during Vietnam were incredible. So the band was wonderful. In fact, Frank Mantuz and I were roommates for 4 years on the road. The band was on the road many months out of the year. I did a lot of recording, did some film soundtracks, things like that. And when I got out of the service, I actually went to L.A. for a very short time. And I had worked for Peanuts Hucko actually before I got out of college, and Peanuts at that time in 1967-68 owned a club in Denver called the Navarra Club. The jazz club right across the street from the Brown Palace Hotel, and came through Denver with Buddy's band, and Buddy took me in to meet Peanuts, and Red Norvo was the vibist, and it was an amazing quintet there. Maury Feld was the drummer, and Buddy asked Peanuts if I could sit in, and I sat in, and a few months later, Maury Feld needed to take some time off, so Peanuts called me, and I drove out to Denver, and that happened 2 or 3 times, actually. And so when I got to L.A., Peanuts, and he was married to Louise Tobin, who just passed away. She was Harry James' first wife, and was a great singer, and she just passed away a few months ago at the age of 104. It's just incredible. And Peanuts had me over. He was, at that time, he had taken Pete Fountain's place on the Lawrence Welk show, and he was wanting to leave, and he ended up taking over the Glenn Miller Band for a while, and so I left LA and went out on tour with several bands, and Stan Kenton being one of them, and Peanuts finally called me and hired me to come on the Miller Band for a while. I stayed there until he left, and then a little while, actually Buddy Morrow took Peanuts' place on leader of the Miller Band, so I stayed on for a while with Buddy, and then ended up going through a divorce, and I'd gotten a call from Ken Morris, who was running. Ken inherited the Stan Kenton clinics, and in high school I was a Kenton clinic camper. Me and the Wrecker brothers and Keith Jarrett and Gary Burton, all those guys, we were all campers together. And I got a call from Ken Morris wanting to know if I would want to come on the camp staff and do the summer camps. And all my heroes were there, Jack Peterson and John Laporta and all these incredible players. And so I just jumped at the chance. And John introduced me to Jack Riley. Jack was there playing piano and taking care of one of the piano chairs at the camp. Introduced me to Jack, and we did some playing together. And he had just broken up his trio with Jack Six and Joe Cocuzzo, and was wanting to put together another trio. So he put together a trio with Richie Ambler on bass and myself, and we toured all over the world with that trio. And Jack finally broke up that trio. He got a full-time job at the Mannes Conservatory in Brooklyn. And I ended up moving to Chicago. And I had a lot of contacts there through the camps, Roger Pemberton, all the guys, and Steve Rodby. And ended up moving to Chicago and just stayed there in Chicago from about 1977 until September 1st of this year. And Janice and I had come into Emporia and played the Granada Theater with our band several times, and we had friends and relatives here, and figured, we can just about run our business from anywhere. So we decided a couple of years ago to if the opportunity came up, we would move back here. And some friends of ours called us in May and say, the house that you should have is on the market now. It's on a lake, and we put in a bid, got the house, and moved here September 1st. So here we are.
So
that's probably more than you wanted to know.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, that's good. That gives me a good backdrop. And I'm curious, you played around a lot of big players over your career. What did you learn from the legends and luminaries that you would impart onto the young players that you got around?
Well, there were. I think the arts and jazz is very much like a family. Otherwise, I have musical mothers and musical fathers and musical brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, I find it disturbing that I now have some musical grandchildren. And so there were people who I worked with who had a great deal of influence. I played on Bunky Green's quartet for about 4 or 5 years out of Chicago, and in fact, with Bunky's quartet, we started the Montreux Jazz Clinics in Montreux, Switzerland in 1984. And Bunky was like a musical father to me. These are people who take you under their wing. They don't just they sort of adopt you, and you become a part of their bloodline, their musical bloodline, and they entrust you with that bloodline, and they expect you to protect the nobility of that bloodline by handling yourself correctly, behaving as a responsible artist. John Laporta, another musical father of mine. Jack Peterson, the great jazz guitarist, another musical father. Clark. I had a lot of respect for and loved playing with him. It was a little bit different relationship. It was more of wow, I guess Clark would be like an uncle, So those are people that Roy Burns taught me how to be in this business. All these guys taught me how to be in this business and opened doors for me. And actually, Bunky and John Laporta both played with Charles Mingus. And so I think I have Mingus in my bloodline. He's like the grandfather I never met. But I absorbed Mingus's music through Bunky and through John Laporta. So, these are guys that they all encouraged me to play, to let me play. They encouraged me or let me play the way I wanted to play, and didn't really dictate to me how to play, but encouraged me to interpret the music the way I actually felt it. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that does, absolutely. Yeah, and I want to kind of preen back a little bit and ask you, what was the first live jazz show that you ever saw that made you think that's what you would want to do with your life, or that really blew you away?
Well, like I say, I started playing when I was 4. And at the time, Roy Burns was playing in the Emporia Municipal Band. He was in a high school. And he's the first live drummer I heard ever. And was so enthralled with Roy's playing. And you have to understand, I was 4 years old, so I don't really remember. I have no memories of when I wasn't playing. But I think the first jazz groups that I heard was a band that Roy was playing in. It was a local territory band here. It was a band called The Counts, which had a lot of World War II veteran musicians in it. Ed Wertman. Marion Plummer was a trombonist. Marion was Doc Severinson's roommate on the Randy Brooks Band. And when Roy left, I took his place on The Counts. But I think The Counts, it was a big band and played all over the Midwest. So I think probably that was the first jazz group I heard live. The first named jazz group I heard, wow, that might have been Louis Armstrong.
Wow.
And in fact, my parents took me to see him. He played here at the Civic Auditorium, and it was Louis Armstrong on trumpet, Edmund Hall on clarinet, Trummy Young on trombone, Billy Kyle on piano, Mort Herbert on bass, and Velma Middleton was a singer, and the drummer was Danny Barcelona. And I was so excited. My Louis and the band were going to autograph programs. In fact, I still have my autograph program backstage after the concert. So my father took me back to get my program signed, and I was super excited. And when we waited in line and got up to Louis Armstrong, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Armstrong, I've never heard anything like that in my life," and I just kept. And my father had to tap me on the shoulder to shut me up. And Louis said to me, he says, "What is your name, young man?" And I says, "Jackie Mouse." He says, "Do you play an instrument, Jackie Mouse?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I play the drums." And he looked at my father and he says, "You need to keep an eye on this one. He's got that look in his eye." And I can't tell you how I survived on Louis Armstrong saying I had that look in my eye for years. And it also emphasized the point that what you say and how you treat younger musicians is really important. You can destroy them or you can give them hope. And but that was a monumental point in my life of Louis Armstrong saying that to me. It was really a great moment.
So, you've been at this for a long, long time as a musician. What's been your key to longevity?
When I moved to Chicago, I was actually passing through Chicago on my way to New York. And I called Steve Rodby, this was before he was with Pat Metheny. I called Steve Rodby. He was living in Evanston. And he was doing a lot of studio work. And I called Steve and I said, "Steve, in the meantime," I'm sorry, I'm going to need to back up. Roger Pemberton had called me and said, "I hear you're moving to New York." And I said, "Yeah, Roger, I am." He says, "Are you going to come through Chicago?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can." He said, "Good, because if you come through Chicago, I've got 3 or 4 nights worth of work for you if you'd like to do it." So I called Steve and I said, "Steve, can I hang out at your place in Evanston for a few days?" And Steve said, "Sure." So I worked with Roger's big band and met Warren Kime and Ross Trout and all these guys. And Warren said, "If you want to stick around, I've got a week's worth of work here." And at that time, Chicago was booming. It was nothing to work a triple on a Saturday. It was just, there was so much work. And people kept hiring me to stay a few more days. And finally, Steve Rodby looked at me and says, "You either need to get your own place or go to New York." and I said, "Point well taken." And so I stayed in Chicago. And to be a successful Chicago musician, and I've heard a lot of musicians define Chicago musicians this way. They say a Chicago musician is someone who can play anything, anytime, anywhere with anybody. So I think the versatility that I had to put together had a lot to do with it. I worked with Latin bands. I worked with Bunky's bands. I worked with Roger's big band. Did a lot of studio work. Did a lot of the showrooms. The showrooms were all open in Chicago. I worked with B.B. King at the Blue Max. So I think it's just the ability to be able to play all kinds of styles, and also I never lost track of the fact that I'm a rhythm section player, and our primary job is to make whoever we're playing with sound better than they are. And so that was always my goal. And I've been very fortunate, too. That's the other thing.
Yeah. So as you look on your career and all of the things that you've done, what are you the proudest of?
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. Wow. That's a tough one. I recently, I met Janice in 1984, and I was also teaching. I taught part-time. I taught at the American Conservatory, and then I helped start the program at Illinois Benedictine College, and then ended up running the Jazz Studies program at North Central College as a half-timer. I never taught full-time, but at the time when Janice and I met, she was one of the few improvising vocalists I heard that I thought was doing it right. And when did we start the camp? 1989, we started the very first vocal jazz camp in the world, and it was the Janice Borla Vocal Jazz Camp. And that camp ran for 25 years. And we brought in everybody. And I worked with the Dan Hurley Trio for a long time. Bob Bowman, Kansas City boy, was the bass player, and Dan Hurley, and that was the rhythm section for the camp. And so I feel really good about my participation with that endeavor. The fact that a lot of young vocalists and vocalists you hear about today, a lot of them came through that camp. And so I think the fact that we touched a lot of lives, in fact, when the PBS had a show called the Lear Report, was their news report, and we got a call. We were, I think, our 15th anniversary. Got a call from PBS, and they wanted to come in and spend the week putting together a feature program on the camp for the PBS Jim Lear News Hour, and we were just bowled over by the fact they would want. And Spencer Michaels came onto campus. I couldn't believe that Spencer Michaels was running this production, and then they aired it on Thanksgiving of that year. So I think my involvement with that would rank pretty high as what I'm really proud of.
So everyone out there, Jack, has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
I'm still trying to figure that out. Janice and I felt like we needed to pull away from the business of music for a while and sort of reinvent ourselves. We felt like we were getting stale, maybe. So right now we're looking at different projects and trying to decide what direction we want to go. Fareed Haq has worked with us for many years, and we're talking with Fareed about possibly putting together a jazz tango project featuring the music of Astor Piazzolla, which was the great Argentinian tango person. And we also have a work. It's actually written by Howard Brubeck. In the 60s, Howard Brubeck, Dave Brubeck's brother, wrote a thing called Dialogues for jazz group and symphony orchestra, and the Brubeck group and the New York Philharmonic under the direction of Leonard Bernstein recorded it. And we've been going out, not very often, but playing that work with symphony orchestras. So we're thinking about trying to do a little more booking with that and taking the band in. The band is incredible. Fareed Haq is our guitarist. Fareed was with Sting for a while, and Larry Gray is our bassist. Larry was with Ramsey Lewis for years. Scott Robinson is just incredible. He's a multi-instrumentalist. Plays with Maria Schneider's orchestra. When we use piano, we like to use Pat Coyle, who actually he lives in Nashville. He's actually Michael McDonald's music director, but plays as a wonderful jazz pianist. And we use Art Davis on trumpet. Art was with Ray Charles for a long time. So the band is incredible. And we've played together so long that it's pretty comfortable. But we're sitting back trying to say, well, what do we want to do now that we haven't had time to do in the past? Let's take the time to sit down and figure out exactly what the heck we want to do. We just finished. We have a trio called 3 Story Sandbox, which is a free improvisation group, and we've done 2 albums. Actually, one. Scott and I did a free album called Snakeheads and Ladybugs, and then we did brought Janice into the mix, and she's an incredible free vocalist, and did 3 Story Sandbox, and that album ended up being a Downbeat editor's pick. And in April, we recorded a 3 Story Sandbox recording with Mark Feldman, who people will know Mark because he was on most of John Abercrombie's last albums before John passed away. So we're in the process of getting that ready to release. As we feel like we need to explore the free music market a little better. So it's a matter of sitting down and saying, what do we want to do next?
Wonderful. Jack, if anyone wants to pick up your music, learn more about you, anything related to your world, is jackmouse.com the right place to go?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're in the process of adding a bunch of things to the website, but that's the place to go. Or you can go to Janice's website, janicebourla.com, and I'm all over her website too. So that's really the place to go to get a little more bio info, that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Hey, Jack, this has been great. I'm so glad that Kevin led us together. It's wonderful to tap into your wealth of jazz knowledge and wisdom. Thank you for taking time out today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good deal.
Awfully good to meet you, Joe, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Emporia, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Jack for his time, energy, and cool. You can find Neon Jazz archived interviews at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube. For all things Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.